We are now live. Sound check. Audit, Finance, and Administration Committee meeting for Thursday, June 16th, 2022. Sound check.
Absolutely, we're live now.
Thank you. So good morning, everyone. I'd like to call the meeting of Audit and Finance Administration to order. Members of the public are advised that our meetings are webcast live by the City of Hamilton and temporarily archived on the city's website. Any presentations and reports considered at this meeting are available on the city's website, and members of the public can contact the clerk's office to acquire documents in an alternate form. As well, a reminder that all electronic devices are to be switched to non-audible. I'm just going to do that now. During committee meetings, and members are reminded of the 5-minute time limit, which will be adhered to during the meeting, and members can submit another request to speak if they require more time. And we note quorum is present, Madam Chair. So I see Councillor Ferguson, Councillor Powers, Councillor Vanderbeek, and myself, correct?
And in Council Chambers, Councillor Clark and Councillor Wilson.
Thank you for that. I'm glad. And Councillor Brenda Johnson, I just saw her come on board now. So, Madam Clerk, are there any changes to this morning's agenda?
Yes, Madam Chair, there are 2 added communications items to be received and referred to consideration of item 8.1. That's 5.1, correspondence from David Bronskill, Goodmans LLP, respecting item 8.1, which is the community benefits charge strategy. 431 to 61 Wilson Street and 97, 99, and 117 John Street North. And 5.2, correspondence from Lou Piriano, Realtors Association of Hamilton Burlington, respecting item 8.1, which is the community benefits charge strategy. 3 added delegation requests, all for today's meeting. 6.1 is Michelle Diplock and Daryl Kelleher, West End Home Builders Association, respecting item 8.1, once again, the community benefits charge strategy. Item 6.2, Brent Marshall, on behalf of Wahed Al-Jabri Hamilton Downtown Mosque, respecting their support of the city staff's recommendations in item 10.2. Item 6.3, Alex Bishop on behalf of DCR Holdings, Inc. and Harlow Capital, respecting item 10.3. There is also a proposed change to the order of the agenda due to a scheduling conflict. Items 10.1 and 14.2 would be dealt with immediately following item 6, which is delegation requests.
Thank you for that. May I have a mover and a seconder to approve the agenda as amended? Moved by Councillor Brenda Johnson, second by Councillor Arlene Vanderbeek. We're going to try electronic vote, everyone. Excellent.
And that vote carries 7-0.
Thank you very much. Are there any declarations of interest this morning? Seeing none, may I please have an approval of the minutes of the previous meeting of June 2nd, 2022, moved by Councillor Powers, second by Councillor Ferguson. Electronic vote, please.
And that vote carries 7-0.
Thank you. Communication items 5.1 is corresponds from David Bronskill, Goodman's LLP, respecting item 8.1 today, community benefits charge strategy 41 to 61 Wilson Street and 97, 99 and 117 John Street North. Recommendation be received and referred to consideration of item 8.1. And we have item 5.2 corresponds from Lou Priano, Realtors Association Hamilton Burlington, respecting item 8.1 community benefits charge strategy. Recommendation also be received and referred to consideration of item 8.1. May I have a mover and a seconder to move these accordingly? Moved by Councillor Vanderbeek, second by Councillor Ferguson. All in favor?
And that vote carries 7-0.
Thank you. We have item 6 is delegation request 6.1 Michelle Diplock and Daryl Kelleher, West End Home Builders Association, respecting item 8.1 community benefits charge strategy. Item 6.2 is Brent Marshall on behalf of Wahed Al-Jabri, Hamilton Downtown Mosque, respecting their support of city staff's recommendations in item 10.2. And 6.3 is Alex Bishop on behalf of DCR Holdings, Inc. and the Harlow Capital respecting item 10.3. May I have a mover and a second to approve these delegation requests? Moved by Councillor Clark, second by Councillor Wilson.
And that vote carries 7-0.
Thank you. Now we're going to go on to discussion items. Madam Clerk, I'm assuming my roadmap has that change that you mentioned earlier of switching the items. Thank you. I just want to be sure. So item 10 is discussion item 10.1 is the 2021 City of Hamilton Financial Report and Audited Financial Statements, FCS 22044 citywide. We have Mike Zagaric in attendance and KPMG auditors Paul Siapana and Jasmine Morales. May I have a mover and a second to put the item on the floor? Moved by Councillor Ferguson, second by Councillor Powers. The item is on the floor. Are there any discussions, concerns, comments with regards to this? Councillor Ferguson, sir. Councillor Ferguson? Oh, can't hear you, Councillor Ferguson. I'm sorry, Madam Clerk, I'm not sure. Councillor Ferguson, did you have a question?
Yes.
Thank you. There you go. We couldn't hear you.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Thank you. Just some comments. First of all, I'd like to congratulate our human resources staff. They're back to work folks we hired, and because there seems to be a significant reduction in the amount of PTS claims. So I think they're doing a good job of getting people back to work. I don't know what the heck happened in 2018, but there was a huge jump. So I'd like to congratulate them. Number 2, I was surprised on table 1 on page 2 that we actually have more firefighters off than police. That's a switch. And once again, something happened in 2018 where 10 firefighters went off with PTSD. I don't know, does staff have an explanation why that exponential jump in 2018 for firefighters?
Do we have someone, Mr. Zagarik's here, but I'm not sure if there's someone from Human
Maybe
Resources.
Lorna.
Go ahead, Mike.
Oh.
So, through the chair, I believe Councillor Ferguson is on 7.1.
Sorry, Lloyd.
Let me go back to my agenda. I am. Where are you guys?
Well, I'll keep the roadmap going in order. We'll catch you later.
Okay, thank you.
10-1, okay? Thank you.
And one.
Yes.
Oh, I have a question here too then.
Okay, great catch.
Okay, and so I just got to get my notes sorted out. I just want to publicly congratulate our entire finance staff, and in particular our general manager Mike Zagarik and all his going to AAA plus on our credit rating. That is a huge step, and that should not go unnoticed. It's going to make our borrowing easier, more competitive, but more importantly, it tells the world that we're in good financial shape. And the reason for that is because we have great finance staff. So I want to publicly congratulate them on that. And my second comment is on the KPMG report, Appendix C, page 16. I thought I almost stopped reading the report once I read this from KPMG. There are no concerns with the financial statements that were audited. So once again, great congratulations. We're so lucky to have finance staff that are so capable to get this stuff done. And quite frankly, if I was running the city of Hamilton, I would give Mike a $200,000 bonus. And this is what had happened in the private sector when you hit these kind of thresholds. So I know Mike is rubbing his hands together, and I see Mr. Power saying time out. But that's what would happen in the private sector when you have staff that are this competent to get these kind of end results, measurement results. I missed that opportunity I had in the private sector. I could walk down the hall and hand an outstanding employee a check. And so all I could do, Mike, is say thank you to you and your team and two great outcomes. And that's all I got, Madam Chair.
Well, Lloyd, you can always give him a facsimile, and just remember, Mike, he does not run audit finance of the city. So, but thank you, Councillor Ferguson, for mentioning the credit rating, because yes, we did go from a AA plus stable, and we went from a AA plus stable to the AAA stable.
Correct.
So, congratulations to staff. I had that also to mention. Mike, did you want to comment?
Yeah, through you, Madam Chair, and thank you to Councillor Ferguson for his complimentary comments, but I need to extend those to Shelley Hesmer, our Acting Director of Financial Services, and our accounting team, and all of the finance admin team. It's that broad team that pull all this information, and I also want to thank Paul Chiapana as well as KPMG and his team for their work in preparing the audited financial statements and preparing KPMG and city staff, preparing them under somewhat challenging circumstances the last 2 years. Everyone's had to pivot because of the pandemic. And so I want to thank all of city staff. I want to thank KPMG for their support in preparing the audited financial statements. And again, thank you to committee members for your complimentary remarks to the broader team.
Excellent. Thank you for that, Mike. And you are right. There's always behind every great person, there's a whole bunch of other greater people that bring things together, and really appreciate the tremendous commitment we have of our staff at the city and our KPMG assistants as well. So thank you, everyone. So with that, are there any other questions or comments? Seeing none, I'll ask for a recorded vote.
Madam Chair, sorry, Councillor Clark would like to speak to the issue.
Oh, my apologies. Councillor Clark, I'm sorry. I didn't have my chat thing open. Go ahead, sir.
That's okay. This is a great report, but I have a question, I guess, for Mr. Zagarik. I'm trying to understand the potential impacts on prime, CPI, the supply issues, and the RFP increases that we're seeing. So is it possible to get a report, perhaps, for a future AFA in terms of what this apparent financial storm may or may not do to Hamilton?
Through you, Madam Chair, yes, you can. In fact, staff are working towards an August report in conjunction with an outlook report for 2023. We do want to provide committee some sense as to what we see transpiring on the contractual side, as well as in procurement of goods and services in 2022, as well as some indication or sense as to what may be transpiring in 2023. So through you, Madam Chair, staff are working towards an August report with that content.
Excellent. Thank you,
very
Councillor
much.
Clark. Thank you for that question.
Thank you.
Is that it then? So we have no further questions. Mover and seconder has put it on the floor. A recorded vote, please.
And that vote carries 7-0.
Thank you, everyone. We're going to move on because the roadmap was changed. Our order of items today, we're moving on to item 14, which is a private and confidential item. 14.2 is regarding 386 Wilcox Street Assessment Review Board Appeals, ARB, decision and next steps. FCS 20093A, LS 20029A, citywide. Prior to going into closed session, we will need a motion to permit the consultant related to item 14.2 to also participate in closed session. So may I please have a mover and a seconder on the following: that the legal consultant, John L. O'Kane, be permitted to attend the closed session portion of the meeting with respect to report FCS 20093A, LS 20029A, 386 Wilcox Street Assessment Review Board Appeals, ARB decision and next steps. I saw Councillor Brenda Johnson. Thank you. And Councillor Powers moved and seconded. That would that be allowed? And recorded vote, please.
So sorry, Madam Chair, it will not allow me to open the vote as it says there's a voting in progress. Give me one moment and see if I can rectify it. If not, we'll just vote by a show of hands.
Not a problem.
And the vote should be up now. My apologies.
Thank you. There we go. Got it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Powers. I see your thumb. Oh, and Councillor Johnson.
Councillor Johnson.
And that vote carries 7-0.
Thank you, everyone. Now, going into closed session, may I please have a mover and a seconder to move into closed section? And I'm going to read it all. Well, I'll ask first. Councillor Powers, Councillor Ferguson, pursuant to section 9.1, subsections E and F of the city's procedural bylaw 21-021 is amended, and section 2392, subsections E and F of the Ontario Municipal Act 2001 as amended, as the subject matter pertains to litigation or potential litigation, including matters before administrative tribunals affecting the municipality or local board, and advice that is subject to solicitor-client privilege, including communications necessary for that purpose. And we require an electronic vote, please.
So, Madam Chair, Councillor Clark has a question before we vote on this item.
Thank you. Thank you for that. Councillor Clark.
Thank you, Chair. Assessment Review Board decisions, are they public documents?
Through the chair, Acting City Solicitor Ron Sabot, yes, they are public documents, and we expect that part of the report will be released later today.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone. So it's on the floor, electronic vote to go in camera, please. Councillor Powers is a thumbs up, I saw.
And Councillor Johnson, perfect. And Councillor Wilson as well. Okay, so that vote carries 7-0.
Okay, thank you, everyone. So now, members of the public are advised that during the closed session portion of the meeting, sorry, I'm going to go back to here. There we go. The live stream will broadcast a closed session in progress screen. The broadcast will resume when the closed session portion of the meeting is complete. And we are now moving into closed session. I'd ask that all members of the public, delegates, and external participants to please now exit the WebEx meeting if you're not a participant here, and that the committee clerk will send an email to all delegates, external participants, staff when we are returning to open session, so you may rejoin the WebEx to participate. As well, any staff that are not directly related to this in-camera item are asked to also vacate And I want to ask all my council colleagues, please ensure that you're in a private room and that you're in the closed portion of eScribe. So I'm just going to ask for a minute, Angela, for you to do that, and I will get into eScribe and I'll be right back.
Please, yes, Councillor, we'll let you know when we have everything sorted on this end.
Perfect. And go back into your open session on eScribe, everyone. Thank you. Everyone, we'll see in the chat. Mr. Zergaric has to leave us. Congratulations, Mike, to your son. Enjoy the rest of your day at his convocation. And best wishes to you and the family.
So, Councillor Pearson, just need to try and contact one more person, and then we'll be ready to go.
Okay, not a problem. Thank you. My little bandit. My little bandit just wants to say hi. You see all my friends there? Hey?
He's very, very cute.
You see all my, oh, do you hear that? He loves the keyboard, so I won't let him touch it. What do you think? What's going on? Nana's got to go back to work. Ciao, sweetie. Okay. Just about there, Angela?
Yes, Councillor Clark just stepped away for a moment, but I think we are good to go otherwise.
Perfect. Okay. Thank you, everyone. So we're back in open session on item 14.2 is 386 Wilcox Street Assessment Review Board Appeals, ARB decision and next steps. May I have a mover and a seconder to approve the following. A, that the directions to staff in closed session be approved and released publicly following approval by council, which will follow our meeting. And B, that Appendix A to report FCS 20093A, LS 20029A be released publicly following approval by council. And C, that report FCS 20093A, LS 20029A, and Appendix B remain confidential. I saw Councillor Brenda Johnson moving it, second by Councillor Clark. Recorded vote, please, everyone. And a thumbs up for Councillor Powers. Thank you.
And we are having trouble displaying that vote right now, but it does carry 6-0.
Thank you, everyone. So we're going to carry on now with the rest of the agenda. And we're going to return now to item 7 is consent items and continue on from there. So 7.1 is the post-traumatic stress disorder UR 22007 citywide. Laura Fontana, may I have a mover and a seconder to receive this item? I'm not sure. Is Councillor Ferguson still with us?
I believe he's stepped away for a little bit, but I know Councillor Clark would like to speak to this item.
Okay, thank you. First to have a mover and a second, moved by Councillor Clark, second by Councillor Vanderbeek. Then to put it on the floor, Councillor Clark, go ahead.
Thank you, Chairperson. I do want to thank staff for the report. The only question that was left in my mind after reading it was, is there a correlation between staff morale and an increase in PTSD? Is there, and B to that question is there a way of trying to assess that?
So through you, Madam Chair, it's a bit of a difficult question, Councillor, to answer, and I would be speculating. The PTSD, as you appreciate, is directly related to the work environment, and for first responders, my sense is not necessarily a direct relationship with the culture or the morale in the organization. It's more in terms of the direct involvement with their day-to-day experiences working in an emergency services environment. It's hard to characterize or make that connection in terms of the staff morale. I would say no, generally speaking, and I'm just trying to think how I would be able to even assess that. It's just our OPS results would be another indicator, and they're generally quite good across the organization. There are certainly pockets, but there wasn't anything specific in terms of fire and paramedics that would suggest otherwise. But we can do a deeper dive if that's what you would like.
I'm not sure I'm ready to go down that road, Chair Pearson, but I have been reflecting on it, and I am sincerely trying to assess if there are a significant increase of grievances that would indicate a challenging morale issue, and then a corresponding increase in PTSD. I grant immediately that most of the PTSD, if not all, is based on what they have seen, what they've experienced, and personal injuries. All of that come into play. But I know psychologically that if you're working in an environment with a morale issue, that can also contribute to your psychological well-being, which can contribute to PTSD. So I'm not sure how we would equate it, but the logic is there for me. And that's what I'm wrestling with. How would we quantify that challenge?
Yeah, through the chair, just perhaps in response, it's, one impacts the other. I don't think you can separate them. Certainly your experiences in the work environment, either, administratively or with first responders, it will ultimately have an impact on you in your professional and personal life. We didn't see anything specific in our OPS results to that effect. The PTSD numbers have declined over the last couple of years, as you can see, and there's a lot of efforts that are going into that in terms of supports and training. The stigma obviously isn't as great as it used to be, and folks are talking about it more now, which is obviously a very good thing. It's certainly something to keep an eye on, and we have various mechanisms for measuring those types of things. We can review it, and if there's some areas of concern, we can absolutely report back on it.
And Chair Pearson, I don't want my question to be misinterpreted as I'm not satisfied with the report or where we are. There's been significant improvement, and clearly your division is doing an awful lot of work. But as I was going through the reports and looking at past reports in my mind, that question kept popping up. And I honestly don't know how we would correlate it. But it's something I think we need to be mindful of, that's all. Thank you, Chair Wilson, and Chair Pearson, too.
Thank you, Councillor.
You're all chairs today.
We're all chairs today. So it's been moved and seconded. Electronic vote, please. Councillor Powers, thumbs up.
And it's a thumbs up from Councillor Wilson as well. And that vote carries 6-0.
Okay, thank you, everyone. 7.2 is the 2022 first quarter emergency and non-competitive procurement report, FCS 22046. Citywide, we have Shelley Hesmer in attendance. May I have a mover and a seconder to receive this consent item, and if there's any discussions items, that'll follow. Moved by Councillor Brenda Johnson, second by Councillor Wilson, I think, in Chambers. Any questions or comments on this? Seeing none, a recorded vote, please.
So I'm just going to be canceling the vote, Madam Chair. Councillor Clark has a question.
Sorry, it's not coming up on chat. I apologize because it doesn't show up here. Councillor Clark, go ahead.
So I'm looking at the Appendix A, first quarter emergency. The line number, where is it now? Hang on one second, is 99231, and it showed a tender $249,999.99. So is that where we are now when we say, well, you can't exceed 250, so we come up right up to the penny? It just seems odd. Anyone care to comment?
So, Madam Chair, it looks like Tina Iacocca is here to speak.
Thank you.
Through the chair, that happens to be the cost, yes, and it's 1 penny less than the threshold for the GM approval. If in any event, if that was not appropriate and there were additional amounts of money that needed to be added to that particular PO, it would come to council for approval.
Thank you. It just struck me as odd. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, everyone. It's been moved and seconded duly. Put on the floor. Recorded vote, please.
And that vote carries 6-0.
Thank you. And we're moving on to, I think it's 7.3, 2022 first quarter non-compliance with procurement policy report, FCS 22047, citywide. Again, Shelley Hesmer. Mover in a second to put this on the floor. Moved by Councillor Powers, second by Councillor Vanderbeek. Any questions? Seeing none, recorded vote, please. To receive. A thumbs up for Councillor Powers.
And that vote carries 6-0.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. 7.4, 2022 first quarter request for tenders and proposals report, FCS 22048, citywide. Again, Shelley Hesmer. And may I please have a mover and a second to receive this item? Moved by Councillor Wilson, second by Councillor Clark. Any questions or comments on this item? Seeing none, a recorded vote on this one, please. Thumbs up for Councillor Powers.
And that vote carries 6-0.
Thank you. We're going on now to item 8 is staff presentations. We have 8.1 is the Community Benefits Charge Strategy, FCS 22015B, citywide. Brian McMullen, Director of Financial Planning Administration Policy, is here to introduce the presentation of the Community Benefits Charge Strategy. Welcome, Brian. Where are you? I don't see you in yet. And you're going to also be introducing Gary Scanlon of Watson and Associates. Sorry.
Good morning, committee. Brian McMullen, Director of Financial Planning, Administration and Policy with the Corporate Services Department of the City. As suggested, I'm going to introduce Gary Scanlon, who's going to do the presentation next on the Community Benefits Charge Strategy. I know that they're just setting up now. So,
thank you.
Yeah, so I'll provide a brief overview of the legislation, and Gary's going to get into a lot of the details. So just a reminder, This is not new. This information has been before committee and the DC Stakeholder Committee meeting in the recent couple of years. We responded to changes that were recommended and being introduced back in 2019. We sent our information back at that time. It was 2020 when the Government of Ontario did introduce this new charge, this community benefits charge, and Council in June of 2021 endorsed us moving forward with looking at this the CBC strategy. So what is a CBC? What we have done, and Gary's going to go through it as well, is we have put some information out there, and we did public engagement. So we have information out there that explains what a community benefit charge is and what the benefits are. Gary's going to go through that again today. So it does help the city's capital investment in facilities and services like parks, arts and culture, parkland and more. It'll fund the capital costs of growth-related municipal services that are not being funded by a parkland bylaw or the DC bylaw. So they're important to help replace partially the growth that we have lost, the growth funding that we lost through the changes in the legislation. Gary will cover that as well. The city is no longer going to be allowed to collect DCs for airport and parking, and that'll be covered and was covered in our report that we submitted. And that in particular translates into about $1,200 per single and $700 per two-bedroom unit. In order to implement the CBC strategy, municipalities must pass a CBC strategy and a bylaw to utilize the tool. And that's what's before you today is that framework. And you're also going to hear that a CBC charge, it should be incurred on developments with 5 or more stories and 10 or more residential units, and it'll be paid by developers based on 4% of the land value the day before the building permit is issued. Staff from Planning, Economic Development, and Public Works and Legal Services and Finance are some in person and some are available on the WebEx to answer any calls. And I'll turn it over to Gary Scanlon. Thank you.
Good morning, Gary.
Chair. And thank you, Brian. Great introduction. I think you've already done my presentation. So, no, it's very, very good overview. I'll just provide a little bit more of the meat. Oops, there we go. Apologize for that. So just briefly, I'm going to just give you a little bit more of the background on CBCs. As Brian noted, it's something the province has introduced. We've actually always had, under Section 37 of the Planning Act, something that's been called the Community Benefit Charge. But historically, what it was is a special charge that you would negotiate with a development that either exceeded the density requirements for that area, your zoning requirements, or the height. And if you allowed that development to exceed those, you could sit down with that individual landowner and negotiate additional contributions to the municipality. What they've done now, as Brian noted, they've lowered the bar, so now we're talking about any development that is 5 stories or greater and has a minimum of 10 residential units in it, now is potentially eligible to pay that charge. So instead of hitting just the high density developments, they've now spread it to still higher density, but they've captured more individual developments. We'll talk about the methodology. It's detailed in more verbiage with it in our background strategy that we've provided, and then we'll just go through the highlights, the components of the study. So this was, as noted, put into play in mid-2020. It comes into effect, if there are municipalities that are still using the old Section 37 provisions. The old provisions cease to be in effect as of September 18th this year. And so municipalities have to conform to the new rules prior to that, or they cease to be able to use or recover collections from the higher density development. Basically, the services are, for the most part, non-development charge. So there is a minor provision that we can step into in certain cases to take a look at projects maybe that haven't been included in the development charge. But in working with staff, we wanted to stay away from any development charge related services. So there was no conflict or perspectives of double collecting in any instance. The community benefit charge, as noted, is for developments that are 5 stories or greater and have minimum 10 residential units. And the charge that's put into place is 4% of the market value of that property. As we'll show you later, if you move across the city, the value of the land will vary, so that if you had the exact same development in downtown Hamilton as in, let's say, Ancaster, the land values will be different, so the exact same building may pay a different charge in downtown Hamilton versus the Ancaster area. And that's just a function of the land value. As we say, it's section 37.2, where we have to commence undertaking the study. We have to justify the amount of the charge. So we work with staff to take a look at projects that would be eligible for funding. The charge can be anywhere from 0 up to 4%, so we have to justify that range. If we are in excess of that 4%, then we're capped. We can't go past that amount. So they did put an upper limit on it, and that provides the the framework we have to work within. To undertake this work, we have to start by taking a look at the growth forecast. So the growth forecast will be isolated. We've chosen a 10-year planning horizon as the basis for doing this. We are looking at only those type of units that are eligible. So we've still updated the forecast to consider both residential growth and non-residential growth. But we can't charge for non-res, we can't charge for low density or medium density, and even within the apartment category, not all units are eligible. So I'll show you that in a minute, how we've broke apart the growth forecast, just looking to the eligible costs. We've worked with, so from that, we've been working with planning to identify just those eligible developments. So we've taken a look at where they'll be occurring and undertaken an estimate of how much for all of these different geographies. And then we've looked at the land area associated with those developments, because keep in mind, it's a charge on the land, the market value of the land. So we need to know how much land, and then what is the value of that land, let's say on a per acre or a per hectare basis. And that brings us to item 2, where we worked with the city realty staff, and they've been extremely helpful in assisting us in identifying those values that we would use in these calculations. We then need to turn our minds to identifying projects. We've detailed a number of projects in our study. I'll show you a high-level summary of those costs, and there are a number of deductions and reductions that we have to make, similar to the development charge requirements. So we end up with a net cost, and then it's that net cost divided by the land area times the land value, and that's how we estimate the percentage that would be eligible for putting into a bylaw and imposing over time. I won't go through the details to the schematic, but really this just summarizes it. The top box, which is the anticipated growth, is the starting point, just like it is in development charges. You can see those dark boxes off on the right-hand side are kind of our services that we can consider. So they could be all of the non-DC related projects. So those are one category of services. They could also be topping up parkland dedication. If your bylaw isn't reaching the amount of parkland you need, we could be adding that. And as noted, we could be using some aspects of the DCs, but we're leaving that aside. It will not be included. The orange boxes talk about all the deductions that we must consider with those projects, very similar to the development charge. And at the bottom, we end up with a net cost, and we divide that net cost by the value of the land that we expect with that growth over time. And once again, we come up with a percentage. So I'm just going to go through quickly and give you the components of what we just talked about. So we're looking at the growth forecast over the next 10 years. This information is based on the latest and greatest Grids 2 analysis. So this is the no urban boundary expansion scenario. So we've been focused on updating the forecast for that. And as I noted, we sat down with staff and we're looking at the applications that are coming through the development process in order to have an understanding of how much and where throughout the city these developments will occur. I apologize for the complexity of this table, but this just shows you as we move from left to right, we've looked at the different areas of the city. We've looked at the 10-year planning horizon, and then we've segregated the low density, which are singles and semis, the medium density, townhouses basically, and then we've got our apartments. And that darker green is the component of the apartments which would be eligible. So of the 33,000, almost 34,000 residential units, we're expecting over the next 10 years within the city, about 11,500 of those units are eligible to pay for this CBC charge. As noted, we talked with Realty, and they assisted us in looking at land values, and they summarized the land values by different areas. So you can see the values range from as low as $3 million an acre and as high as $13.5 million an acre in the downtown area. This table just gives you the calculation, basically, or the upper limit on what we could collect. You can see that we've got the 11,000, moving from left to right, the 11,000 units. And if we skip over 2 or 3 columns, you can see associated with those units, we've identified the number of acres that would be on which those units will be built. So of the 11,500 units, we've got about roughly 58.5 acres of land on which those buildings will be built upon. You can see based on the different areas of the city, we've applied the land area to the value of those lands, and we've come up to $261 million as the market value of the land as of today for all of those different developments. If we were to impose 4% on all of those lands, then we would yield roughly about $10.5 million as funding towards many of those projects. So roughly about a little over $1 million a year as the contribution. I've talked about we have to move from those projects, and we have to make a number of reductions and deductions. And this is a very simple schematic to identify how we've moved across. So when on the very left-hand side, when we do all of the benefit to existing, and we take a look at grant subsidies and other deductions, that net cost is where we start to then break it apart and allocate it, in essence, against different forms of development. So for more of the citywide types of works, which may be something such as municipal parking, for example, or the airport lands, as we move across, we would deduct 30% because that would be of benefit to the non-residential sector. So that leaves 70% that would be applied to the res. As we move to the next, to the middle part, you can see but 51% of the development is low and medium density. So we have to deduct that. So of the 70%, we're going to take 49%. And then when we go to the next category, not all of the units would be eligible to pay the charge. So it's only 55% of the apartments. So when we move across, what we see is from the projects the project costs we've started with, in this particular case for these services, we can recover about 19% of those projects. If we look at other works such as cultural services, for example, slightly different calculation because the residential, non-residential split's a little bit different. And you can see on the very bottom right-hand side, for those type of projects, we can recover about 26% of those projects. This just takes the information that we had before, of the $261 million. Once again, it shows you on the very right-hand side that $10.5 million, we would have to identify net projects that are, if they're citywide, we'd have to identify at least $55 million worth of projects. If they're more of the cultural or heritage, we'd need to identify $40 million in order to at least meet that 4% threshold if we wanted to maximize the charge. So what we have done is we've worked with staff to go through all of the different services. As noted, we lost from development charges with the recent changes. Municipal parking has been removed, airports, lands has been removed, portions of social services, and some of the growth-related studies. So those were ones that we could easily identify. We then looked with staff at other services and other types of projects, and they could include things such as municipal administration building expansion, museums, art galleries, art centers, public art, heritage, preservation, landfill, public realm improvements, community gardens, etc. So these are really the area of focus that we've looked at, is these non-DC services. The total capital cost that we've come up with is summarized here. You can see we've given these categories to you by kind of types of services, or types of facilities, and in total we've got about $160 million worth of projects. The deductions that we have to make take us down to almost half, so that the net cost that we can start to work with is about $75.5 million. And then, as I say, from there we have to start allocating those projects against different forms of development, and when we get to the end, the eligible works would be attributed about $15.5 million. And if you look towards the bottom, the $15.5 million in net project cost divided by that forecasted land value of $261 million says that our calculation is in theory to recover 6% of these costs if we didn't have that cap. But as you can see, we are limited by the legislation of not going past 4%, so we do have somewhat of a shortfall in funding. So that would be about $5 million of the $10.5 million is not going to be funded, even though we could justify it. On that basis, when we come forward every year with the capital budget, staff will be prioritizing the projects, and will be recommending of the eligible amount which projects will be receiving the funding from the CBC charges. There are mandatory exemptions, and they're summarized here. So long-term care, retirement homes, universities, colleges, Indigenous institutes, a variety of different facilities associated with the Royal Canadian Legion, hospices, and some nonprofit housing as well. We've also, those are the mandatory ones that are on the top. We've also recommended, in conjunction with staff, to align the CBC policy in a similar way to the development charge. So the reductions of the charges would be considered for the downtown SEPA area, or for residential facilities or lodging houses. So this would line up similar to the development charge policies. This just summarizes the process, and the process is not too unlike a development charge process where we are undertaking calculations. We've gone in conjunction with the Development Charge Committee and have presented information and have received input through that process. We then need to move to a more of a public realm. It's not the same as the development charge. It's not mandatory public meetings, but we must engage with the public. And when council considers the bylaw and approves the bylaw, we have a similar process once again to the DC. You pass the bylaw, we have to put notice in the paper, and then they have 40 days to appeal the bylaw. If there's no appeal, then you move forward. If it is appealed, then potentially you're moving on to the OLT to have discussions or considerations through that tribunal. So this summarizes the process. After we passed the bylaw, initially there was nothing that would restrict, or there was no time horizon on the bylaw. But subsequent to that, the province has now put into play a requirement that municipalities must consider whether the bylaw is still valid or not, and whether you need to renew it. So it's almost like a 5-year consideration. Like the development charge bylaw, come back and look at it every 5 years. It's a similar type of requirement by the province. Next steps is for council to consider the bylaw passage on July 8th, and at that particular point, we would hope to move forward with the bylaw. Madam Chair, I'm happy to answer any questions that members of the committee might have.
My apologies. Thank you, Mr. Scanlon. I have my mic off. We have a speakers list, Councillor Wilson, and then Councillor Clark, please.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Scanlon. I do have a number of questions, just to give you a heads up. I'm trying to understand the affordable housing, the status of that in relation to this. I'd like to also, my second question is that of priorities. I note ours as landfill and parking. And thirdly, I do have a question that I know is outside of our purview, but the values and the philosophy of that which is the threshold of which we can apply this. So if I could start with the first one. My understanding is not long after this council term commenced, we reviewed our DC bylaw and were advised by staff at that time that which was normally enjoyed an exemption, affordable housing, was to be precluded because there wasn't much uptake, and that in its place, an affordable housing policy and presumably financial incentives were supposed to be coming forward. My understanding is that is policy and those financial means are still outstanding. So could you explain to me the status or the relationship between affordable housing and what was originally allowed under Section 37, what is allowed or not under this, and the relationship to affordable housing?
I'll start, and then Mr. McMullen may fill in. So right now there is no mandatory exemption for affordable housing. The categories that I provided are the ones that the province provides for. So there are municipalities that are considering potentially policies, but similar to DC's, a lot of municipalities choose to develop their programs outside of the development, outside of the CBC or the development charge bylaw, because a lot of times it's very difficult to put words into a bylaw and have a specific framework that deals with potentially all different types of cases. You may have certain types of tests, and affordable housing may change over time. So that's where a lot of times many municipalities take away an exemption or don't include a specific exemption for affordable housing, but look to deal with that matter outside of the bylaw, and that may be a grant program. I think that's what you were referring to when we were going through the DEC. There was some discussion about developing those type of programs, and that's where I think for perhaps an update, Mr. McMullen would be a better individual to give you that information.
If an update could be provided, I would appreciate that, because I note I think you mentioned it would be another 5 years before this policy could be reviewed.
If you, with the bylaw, if we put the bylaw in place and tomorrow you came up with a funding a grant, like a grant program, which is focused towards how you define affordable housing, that could be in effect tomorrow. So it would run in conjunction with the bylaw, but we don't have to put that funding program and acknowledge it in the bylaw, because what you would be doing is saying, here's our policy, and if you meet these criteria, we will give you up to 100% of what you would pay under the CBC, and it's a grant. So the individual would just see, you know, I owe this, but I'm getting a grant, so my net cost is potentially up to zero. It depends how you structure your program, but I think for status, if I could, I think Mr. McMullen is best suited for that.
Yes, so through the chair. Yeah, so regarding your question, Councillor Wilson, you know, we've been working with staff in housing services. They've been had other priorities, but the biggest question is about the funding model. Where are we going to fund a program from? So when we have these DC exemptions that currently exist in our DC bylaw, we generally recommend at end of the year on funding the some of those DC exemptions from the year-end operating budget surpluses, either in the tax-supported operating budget or in the rate budget, and put some of those monies towards those exemptions that have been provided in those programs. And we have also, in the case of the tax operating budget and the rate operating budget and capital budget, we have been funding DC exemptions through those processes. So we're collecting tax dollars from the tax operating budget to fund some of these exemptions, which would include the program or any exemptions that are available through the DC Act right now is coming through the budget or through the year-end operating budget surpluses. So we are going to be working with and continue to work with Housing Services Division to develop a program that'll have to come back before council, and it'll have to have a funding source, whether it is reserves or whether it's going to be some kind of a budget contribution in the future to build a reserve for these exemptions.
Chairperson, I appreciate that answer. However, what I was looking for, and I don't know if Mr. McMullen is the person to answer it, but I know he's working on it. So perhaps, what is the status or expected timeline of that policy for the affordable housing that was taken out of the exemption, and on the premise that there was going to be something in its place?
So through the chair again, yeah, we don't have a specific timeline. I'm going to be speaking with Housing Services staff in the next couple of weeks. We've exchanged some emails just recently on that topic, so I can come back and after we have a meeting, and we can provide an update to council on what that date, when that report will be coming forward.
Thank you.
Councillor.
Thank you. Through Chairperson to Mr. Scanlon. Could you, what is the discretion again of the municipality? You mentioned those things that can be included and those things that are excluded. Parking and airport services and landfill. What portion of this as proposed could you help me with the math, be going towards parking and the rationale for that, please?
Am I able to access? I've left all my files up at the chair. Can I take a look at? It should be towards the end of the presentation. Do I have access to the slide? Oh, wait a minute. There we go. Okay, I can.
Yeah, you had a table up. I think it was 21.
Yes, it's on page 19.
Thank you.
Maybe that'd be helpful if we're able to, please, and thank you. I think we're there. Thank you very much for your help.
Thank you.
So this lists the various services that we were speaking of. You can see municipal parking. We had identified about $65 million, and about $5 million would potentially be eligible for funding. Airport services was about $28 million, 27, and the net eligible cost would be around $4 million. And then growth studies were we lost from DCs about 9. So we lost $101 million in gross costs from the development charge. And what we could pick up through this process is upwards to about $10 million. You can see right now there's a variety of other services. Landfill was a question you asked. It's $25 million, and we'd be able to pick up in the range of about $2.8 million on that service.
Thank you, through Chair Pearson. So I guess my question, though, is what informs the municipality through this in that of magnitude and priority? So what public good is being served by, so I guess my first question is, where do these rank in terms of that which would enjoy the greatest return? So parking, 65 million, eligible is 5 million. So I'm just trying to understand so we can account to our residents what priority is being given and why, and what policies corporately, in terms of the public interest, do those serve? What is within our purview to affect here?
Through the chair. So we've worked with staff to identify a number of projects that are either in the capital, your 10-year capital forecast, what's being identified through various master plans, and as I say, what formerly was in the DC study. And this is a listing of those various works. Of these works, we cannot fund all of them. In theory, about $15.5 million would be eligible if we didn't have the cap. So we're only going to be able to fund 10 out of the $15 million. The prioritization of it, if that's the question I understand you're asking, that prioritization will come through the annual capital budget process. When the projects are coming forward, there is a requirement for, at the end of the year, to have 60% of the CBCs allocated towards specific works. Not that they have to be spent, but they have to be allocated. So there's some additional things, but those priorities will come back to council for your consideration as part of the capital budget process annually.
So I'm sure I'm short on time, but if I could just seek clarification of that. So you're saying that these orderings reflect council capital priorities as articulated in a capital budget. I'm trying to understand the only parking that I can recall that has a placemaker in our capital budget is $33 million for a parking structure down at the West Harbor. So I don't know why, if maybe through you, Chair, to Mr. McMullen, if he could help contextualize this so I can make sense of it, please.
So through the chair, sorry, I'm just going to bring back up my slide a little closer. Yeah, so the presentation in that particular slide are not in a particular order. The first ones that are listed up there would be the related to the ones that are becoming ineligible. So the parking, the airport, and the growth studies. So they're not listed in a particular priority. They're just listed as far as the DC projects and services that are going to become ineligible. But yeah, there is a potential that we can use these CBCs that are going to be collected for the services. And in the report, we have an appendix. I think it is C, that has a list of the projects that will be coming forward in the future capital budgets for these types of projects. So they'll be brought before you in the tax supported capital budget, and then we'll talk about at that time whether we're going to then fund them from the CBCs. The portion of the cost of some of those works would not be funded from CBC, but they might be funded from other capital sources, which could include our contributions or our debt. So they would be part of the annual capital budget process, as Mr. Scanlon mentioned.
And Counselor, I apologize. I have a new phone and my timer did not work properly. So you are well past the 5 minutes. I will ask if you will put yourself back on and we'll go to Counselor Clark, please.
Yes, please. Thank you.
Thank you. Counselor Clark.
Thank you, Chairperson. I got it right that time. I'm looking also at the same chart, so let's stay where we are. And I'm trying to understand how the chart is working. So on the left-hand side, it says DC services becoming ineligible, municipal parking airport services growth studies. And then on the other side, it says CBC eligible costs. So I'm kind of confused. If they're ineligible, how are they eligible on the right-hand side when they're ineligible on the left-hand side? Maybe it's just me.
No, it's a very good question. Through the chair, the transition for the CBC is the same transition timeline for the development charge. So those services that are in your bylaw right now are eligible, but as of September 18th, they drop off.
Okay.
So I apologize. I should have been clearer.
No, that makes, I understand that. So, it indicates landfill services. Do we have an understanding as to what that entails?
So through the chair to Councillor Clark. So yeah, there's a number of projects that have been identified in Appendix C. So staff have worked with Gary and his team to come up with the projects that would then potentially be eligible for the CBC funding. So some of the particular projects are related to a solid waste master plan and alternative disposal facility is one of the examples that's in this list. Glenbrook Stage 3 development. So there's some specific projects that have been identified that will then be brought forward in the capital budget. And in some cases, they may already may be part of the capital budget, just that this will be a new funding source for the growth component that is now covered under a CBC.
So I'm a little bit confused. So are we indicating that we're expanding the Glenbrook landfill? This is going to fund. I really don't understand it. Sorry, Brian.
So through the chair, I may have to pass this off. I think Carolyn Payton is on the WebEx. If she can maybe answer that question from the meetings that she's had, or if there's someone from Public Works on the call about that particular project. Angela, can you see if it's
yes, good morning. Through you, Madam Chair. This is Carolyn Payton speaking. Brian, I think we are going to have to pass it off to someone in Public Works if they're on the call to get the details. These projects have been gathered from the approved capital budget. So at some point they had been identified in that program in the forecast period. But in terms of specific details, I can certainly get you that from Public Works if they're not on the call right now.
Through the chair, Carl Alcan, General Manager, Public Works. I will be reaching out to staff, and hopefully as we get through the next questions, we'll come back to you. Just give us a minute or two. Thank you.
No, that's fine. Yeah, that's the last of my questions. Thank you again for a very comprehensive report.
Through the chair, I might add, if we can't get it quick enough, I think probably I've got access to. We take notes for all of the projects that are in there, so that when we go through, we document everything, and so I have an understanding. I just don't have access to it right now, but I can provide that fairly quickly.
Oh, we just can't hear you, Chairperson.
I'm sorry. Councillor Wilson, second time, please.
So thank you, Chair. So just on the back, before I begin my next question, I am looking at Appendix C, and it does reference in it 2 parking structures. The one I had alluded to, the West Harbour one at $33 million, and a downtown parking structure for almost $30 million. So we're saying that those are going to be we're saying that those are our priorities. for this? If someone could just... And how does parking compare to that of, say, heritage or culture in terms of magnitude? Through the chair.
So through the chair, I'll answer that question, Brian McMullen. Again, yeah. So the list of projects that are provided in Appendix C were projects that might be eligible for the CBC, right? So we came up with $15 million in potential projects, and I think the chart showed the slide that Gary had showed about $10 million is what might be eligible through the CBC. So we have over $15 million, which I think equated to a 6% value based on the land values, but we were only eligible to do maximum of the 4%. So these projects are not necessarily projects that are going to be continuing, but we'll have to have that conversation during the capital budget process to determine whether those projects are in fact needed, and whether we're then going to apply some CBC funds to that, or whether we're then going to have find alternate funding sources for those projects.
Yes, thank you. I understood that. My apologies. I'm trying to understand percentages of how much are we, and goes back to my question about the chart that Mr. Scanlon put back up. I'm trying to understand, is it fair to say this is a reflection of our priorities? And if that is fair, I'm trying to understand what we are articulating as a priority, and I'm trying to understand what portion are we identifying as per, say, culture versus as per parking. Trying to understand quantum.
So if I could, through the chair, go back. As I've noted in the methodology, we start off by identifying projects, and these are all projects that have been before council, either through the capital budget process. So those are those works that are on the lower half of that chart, and the ones that are on the upper half were included in the development charge bylaw. So these projects have been before council before. Going from the gross cost down to the net cost, the CBC eligible, that took a couple of different things. There's deductions that we have to make similar to the development charge deductions, and that's the benefit to existing grant subsidies, other contributions. That brings us down from 159 million to 75 million. So that's the first part. So those first couple of columns, the gross cost, and then if I just go up a bit, to just try and explain that table, you can see that, that the top half of the methodology talks about identifying a number of projects, and then the orange boxes are the deductions that we have to make. So those are the first couple of columns that get us down to then a net cost. So that's the second to last column. Once we get down to that net cost, after we've made all of the mandatory deductions that we're supposed to, if I can go a few slides ahead, then depending on the nature of the project, we can't collect 100% of that net cost like we do with a development charge, because we can only recover off of certain types of development. And that's where that dark blue on the left-hand side says, okay, now we got ourselves down to that net cost, and now we have to make further adjustments. How much can we attribute to the development that's going to be no less than 5 stories with no less than 10 units in those buildings? And that's where, for things such as parking, or for landfill, or for some of the growth studies, or the airport, we'd be picking up 19%. So that lower right-hand side will recover, after we've done all the deductions, 19% of the net cost we can recover from the CBC and help to fund those projects. If there are things such as heritage or cultural services, slightly different calculation of the net cost, we can pick up 26% of that net cost. So these two schematics are what portions you'll be able to recover from this particular chart, because I'm going from that net cost, which is the second to last column, 75.5 million. And then if you go through some of the projects, I can recover 19% of it. And that's what's in that last table, or the last column. And some of them are 26%. Now, once we've done this, if it's a prioritization question, then that'll be something that council can prioritize. Of this list, maybe I'd like to see, cultural take a priority for next year's capital budget, but maybe after that landfill, or maybe after that some other service. It'll be your decision during the capital budget process how the works that we've identified and the potential funding would be allocated. So that's part of the capital budget process. Is that answer your question clear enough, Councillor?
Somewhat. I think I'll have to take it offline. Thank you. I do have another question, if I could, and it is, I understand, completely not within the purview of this council to make. Could you just take a few moments to explain to me the provincial threshold of what would have informed that of the is it 5 stories and above and 10 units? What is the philosophy behind that? Because here's my thesis I would submit. It is rooted in a principle that rewards low density, that low density doesn't exact a cost and to a municipality when there's emerging evidence that in fact it exacts more of a cost than, say, the very resident that we're seeking to charge, and therefore could also act as a disincentive for us to intensify, because that developer is having to pay this. So and so then when I go to one of your chart, which shows that nowhere in Ancaster is a community benefit, I think, maybe you could correct me, money's coming from, because the supposition is that it will continue to have low-income development there. So I know there's a couple of strands there, but I really want to understand the philosophy behind this. I know it's not in our germane, but I think there are some conflicting values and policy objectives. Thank you.
Through the chair, a very interesting question. So we're gonna, what the province was thinking in only isolating that, I can't really answer. I can answer that I was on the province going through the development charge review. If you remember Bill 108, that was going to change 16 different pieces of legislation. Yep. So part of why I was involved in was what they were doing with parkland, CBC obviously, and development charges. So that's areas of my expertise, and I was invited to be on the committee. When the province first came out with Bill 108, what they would have done was, what was initially proposed was to eliminate all services for development charges except for 8. And that would be your water, wastewater, storm, roads, police, fire, and the other 2 slipped me for the moment. they're the big guys I was able to identify. So they were going to say everything else, and then they said everything else, all other services, all other capital would be recovered through a CBC. And the CBC would have been applied against residential of like low, medium, high density, and they also would have charged it against all commercial, industrial, institutional. And we would have looked at every service, and we would have charged it on the land value. And what they were originally talking was for lower tier municipalities, if you're in a 2-tier system, they would get up to 10%, and the regions or the counties would get up to 5%. You as a separated city would get 15% in total. But so we were going to do all of that through this very massive CBC calculation. I don't think in one combined meeting that I had with ourselves and the development community, I think everybody wasn't necessarily pleased with that suggestion. So I don't know, in between that last meeting that I had and what came out in the legislation, I had no further involvement with the province, but we went from 8 services and we for DCs, and we went back up to 20 services. And for the CBC, we went from 15% but down to 4%. But then they said you can only charge this certain category of high density development. What happened in between those 2 meetings, I can't say. There was no further discussions. I don't believe with the development community as well as the municipal community, it just appeared subsequent to that. So it's a lot of internal discussion, and this is what we have.
Thank you. Respectfully, I really appreciate that. But my question to you was to opine on the assumption that is guiding the methodology, which is, it is an assumption that seems backward to me, that a higher residential development generates externalities, whereas low density does not generate externalities and therefore does not have to pay. And to me, that seems backward. And there, as a consequence, it is hamstringing a municipal government's financial capacity to achieve its goals, which are allegedly intensification, and the evidence that denser urban areas exact over the long term fewer costs because of the
Councillor, you are well past your 5 minutes second time. I apologize, but I believe you're editorializing more than asking a question. And I think Mr. Scanlon has explained very succinctly his position and what's before us today. And he's only following the policies and the bills that have been passed at the province and what we have to implement. I also see Carlisle Khan, our Director of Public Works, is wishing to speak on this item. So I'm going to ask Councillor that I allow Mr. Khan to contribute what he may have with regards to your questioning. Good morning, Mr. Khan.
Through the chair to Councillor Clark that had the question around solid waste management and what projects are on board. As for my gut, it was about preparing the landfill for its full optimized use over the expected service life. But more detail, Angela is available, Director of Solid Waste, and I'll pass the mic to her.
Thank you, Carl. Angela?
Good morning, Chair Pearson. It's Angela Story, Director of Waste Management. Apologies for not being on earlier. I wasn't prepared for this part of the presentation. So with respect to the landfill, Councillor Clark, we are currently constructing stage 3, cells C, D, and E, and we still have stage 4 to go. So it's not an expansion of the landfill in any way. It's just prepping. As we fill up previous cells, we just move on to the next cells for construction.
Chair Pearson, I just want to thank them for getting the answer to that question so quickly. Much appreciated.
We have tremendous staff, Councillor. Thank you so much. And everyone, thank you for the patience. So with that, I'm going to ask then, I see no further speakers. I'm going to ask them to receive the presentation. Mover and a seconder. Moved by Councillor Ferguson, second by Councillor Vanderbeek. Electronic vote, please.
And that vote carries 6-0.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. We will now hear from the delegates who've registered to speak on this matter. And we will receive all of the delegations in this matter once they address the committee. A reminder that you have 5 minutes. So Carl Andrus, you're up first. Hamilton Community Benefits Network, please.
button or the scroll wheel? Okay. Hello, Chair, councillors, staff, and members of the public, both here and online. I'm Carl Andrews from the Hamilton Community Benefits Network. It's nice to be back in council chambers to speak to you today about the community benefits charges strategy. I wanted to come before you today. Sorry, did we not? Okay. I wanted to come before you today to point out some items that stood out to me. You've been given a limited but new revenue tool. Community benefit charges are not development charges. On screen is a direct quote from the Watson and Associates Consulting report. This tool is limited to the 4% of the land value the day before the building permit is issued, and only to development over 10 units and 5 stories. So I was surprised to see on page 3 of the report from staff that they recommend that the CBC discretionary exemptions be applied. As the downtown Hamilton growth area is where you stand to collect the most from this new tool, and the amount of developable land downtown is limited, I wondered why you would want to further limit an already limited tool. For the purposes of your consideration today, I wanted to present a community of comparison, the city of Ottawa, and a population about twice ours. Ottawa has calculated a low and high revenue CBC forecast between 3.27 million and 3.6 million and 3.68 million of potential revenue. Ours was averaged and came in about 10.4. However, despite being only twice our size, we stand to collect about a third as much revenue. I wanted to note for this council and ask if, given the firm urban boundary and record-breaking development permits year on year, perhaps something may have been overlooked in these calculations. Remember, the CBC bylaw is not reviewed again until 2027, not the next term of council, but the term after it. For continued comparison here, I note Ottawa intends to use the CBCs as outlined in their required study, 17 million for housing, 380K for traffic calming, 16 million for public realm improvements, 16 million for community facilities, 14 million for active transportation, 12 million for urban parks, a total anticipated need of 76 million in CBC-related costs, far more than they can collect, as noted on the previous slide. Our priorities identified look markedly different. CBC's revenues will go 5 million for parking, 4 million for airport expansion, 2.8 million for landfills, and only 1.7 million for cultural use. Identified our long-term need as 15.5 million. For a city half the size, I wonder why our long-term DC revenue costs came in at 20% less. Not half, not even a third, but 20% of Ottawa's. Ottawa and Hamilton are very different cities, but are they that different by that much? Please take a quick note by way of public feedback and community engagement. These are some of the many comments on the use of CBCs for affordable housing that was received as part of the fulsome engagement done as part of the MCR Grids 2 review. I counted around 30 references to using CBCs for affordable housing on the MCR comments submitted. On page 13 of the staff report, affordable housing is mentioned as a service not listed as part of the review for use under CBC revenue. It notes that a comprehensive affordable housing program is still in its initial stages of development. It clearly notes that once the review is done, then perhaps CBCs might be used for affordable housing sometime in 2027 when this bylaw is reviewed, and that development charges, most recently reviewed in 2019 and allocated, could be your source, or perhaps the now completed 2022 capital budget. I would also like to draw attention to the large capital costs associated for the new parking structure downtown, the one having been bundled as part of the downtown entertainment deal. Could that also be used for affordable housing? A new revenue tool other communities have leveraged to address social issues, but it seems the next 10 years of revenue for this one are being spent today. I might need to wait 5 more years to review this program with you to gauge estimations to find out what our true long-term affordable housing needs are and if they can be funded from this potential source. I'll leave you up with the screens because I'm trying to come in well under time here. With a few more of those MCR comments and reviews, I'll take any questions through the chair, and thank you again for your time and having me.
Thank you, Carl. 4 minutes and 2 seconds. Thank you, sir. Any questions of the presenter?
So,
Seeing none.
Councillor Wilson has questions.
I'm sorry, Councillor Wilson, go ahead.
Thank you, Carl. Through the chair, I think you mentioned it was the City of Ottawa. In your scan, did you include others, or just that was the one that stood out for you? I'm just trying to understand your methodology.
So I did look at a couple of other communities, and quite frankly, Ottawa had the most accessible explanation of the CBC charges. Their report was about a quarter the side of the community benefit strategy charge engaged by Watson. It had accessible language that made it much easier to understand how those charges worked in relation to other communities. I also noted that Watson and Associate did the studies for a lot of other communities I looked at, and I didn't know if that would serve as an appropriate comparison, so I had to find another consulting firm.
Okay, no, thank you. I appreciate that. Thank you. Those are my questions.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Carl. I see no further speakers on yours. I'll now call up Michelle Diplock and Daryl Kelleher of the West End Home Builders Association, and they're joining us virtually. Madam Clerk, I'll trust that you'll, there we go.
Good morning, committee members. My name is Michelle Diplock, Manager of Planning and Government Relations from the West End Home Builders Association. I'm joined by Daryl Kelleher, the Senior Director of Research, Valuation, and Advisory with Altus Economic Consulting. We HBA retained Altus to help us understand the impacts this new community benefits charge will have on the development community and new home buyers in Hamilton. We HBA appreciates the work that staff and Watson have done to ensure some transition for our members, including the proposed exemptions in the downtown community improvement area. We wish to further ask that the city provide exemptions for in-progress permit applications or developments moving through the site plan approvals process currently, as the community benefits charge is a new charge for development in Hamilton. Without this, certain types of development the city seeks to encourage, such as the as-of-right redevelopments, may become economically unviable to proceed. Hindering current active site plan applications, sometimes with existing purchasers, from moving forward would cause adverse impacts to the types of intensification projects Hamilton wishes to promote. It also increases risk and uncertainty for companies and individuals that choose to invest in Hamilton. We note that in the midst of a housing crisis due to a severe shortage of supply, additional taxes, fees, and charges do place additional upward pressure on the cost of housing. Given this charge is new to the City of Hamilton, it is important we take the time to get this right. With that, I'll pass the presentation over to Daryl.
Thank you, Michelle, and thanks for, so thank you to city staff and the city's consultants for the responses provided to the questions we've asked so far. Most of the questions we've raised are questions of clarification regarding the day-to-day implementation of the CBC to ensure that CBCs are imposed fairly, equitably, and transparently. We're involved in similar peer reviews for various clients in at least 10 other municipalities in their upcoming CBC bylaws. So I, like the city's consultant, as he noted in his comments and questions, was also involved in the provincial workshops on DCs, parkland, CBCs, etc., when the CBC was first proposed. And the intent of the CBC was to replace the old Section 37 for density bonusing, which effectively taxed additional density beyond base approved densities. In municipalities where it was used heavily, the use of it was far from transparent, offered little cost certainty, and the quantum of the charge imposed was entirely determined by negotiations. The responses we've received from the city and their consultants have given me some assurance that the city will be on the right track in implementing the spirit of how the CBC was meant to be used to correct the old faults of the old Section 37 system. So things like annual CBC reporting will publicly report on the value assigned to in-kind contributions made in the prior year. The city will not amass inflated reserve fund amounts by committing to allocate 60% of funds to individual projects through the regular capital budgeting process. And most importantly, the city, based on the response provided, will appear to use discretion in accepting in-kind contributions that may not specifically be in the CBC background study, where agreed to between the city and the landowner, of course. So this gives, the Planning Act gives municipalities fairly broad discretion on how to use CBC funds. So looking at how the CBC revenues are proposed to be used by the city, as has been the discussion so far this morning, about 59% of the CBC recoverable costs are for airport and municipal parking services. So understanding that these services were previously in the city's DC bylaw, we're still unsure about how the need for capital improvements at the airport or constructing municipal parking facilities is driven by new growth, particularly given that some of these uses, like the airport and the parking garages, are able to generate significant revenues on their own through airport fees, parking fees, etc. The one thing that the old Section 37 had was that it was a good mechanism to provide in-kind contributions towards whatever those on-the-ground community benefits might have been. Given the city's current slant of their CBC towards municipal parking and airport, it's difficult to see how landowners could provide in-kind contributions to a municipal airport or a municipal parking garage. So it's crucial for the city to allow flexibility in the type of in-kind contributions that more directly improve communities impacted by the high density development that's required to pay CBC. So as this is a new planning tool in the city of Hamilton and elsewhere in Ontario, it's important to get the details right as early as possible before the implementation starts to happen. So we thank city staff for their efforts in answering our questions and providing assurance to the city that the CBC will work as originally intended. Thank you. Those are my comments.
Thank you. Right on time, 4 minutes, 30 seconds. Thank you, everyone. Just going to clarify, is the speakers list Councillor Wilson, Councillor Clark?
That is correct, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Wilson.
Oh, my apologies, just Councillor Clark.
Thank you, Councillor Clark, please.
Thank you, Chair. I have a question for the delegate. I think I heard him indicate that he has been involved in a number of reviews for other municipalities. Can he indicate to me, of all of those other municipalities, how many has he supported the CBC policies that they presented?
Kind of similar to some of my early remarks, there's things we support, there's things we don't support in terms of the implementation. It's really, my focus has often been getting the implementation right, because that was the major flaw of the old Section 37, was that it was very kind of Wild West, so to speak, in terms of how it was implemented. It was very flexible, almost too flexible, some would say. So those are, most of my comments have been about kind of looking at the contents of the bylaws themselves to see if there could be some implementation issues down the road. There's certainly questions about the inclusion of capital works and what types of capital works. There's a lot of discretion in the Planning Act about what can be included, so there's not a lot of direction, unlike the DC Act. There's not a lot of direction to kind of provide too much in terms of commentary on what's included or what's not. That's mostly up to municipal discretion. I think I answered your question. Sorry.
Respectfully, I don't think so. So the question was, how many community benefit charge strategies of other municipalities that you have reviewed, you have supported their strategies?
I don't think I could put a number on that, because I don't think any municipality is this far along in their CBC adoption process. So it's not a matter of like approving or not. So I give my clients advice about what I think some issues are that could be looked at further. But beyond that, it's up to my clients to decide whether they support it or not.
Thank you.
Thank you. That's it, Councillor Clark.
Yes.
Sorry.
Yes.
Thank you. Okay, with that, thank you, everyone. Then we're going to move on to, I need a mover and a seconder to receive the delegations. Moved by Councillor Clark, second by Councillor Wilson. Electronic vote, please.
Is Councillor Fergus away? And that vote carries 4-0.
Thank you. Then we're going back to the recommendations on report 8.1. I have a mover and a seconder to put the report on the floor and approval of the recommendations. Moved by, I got the council chambers, so I'm going to say Councillor Johnson, seconded by Councillor Vanderbeek. And we've had discussions. Electronic vote, please.
So sorry to the chair. Councillor Clark has questions of staff on the report.
Thank you, Councillor Clark. My apologies. Go ahead, sir.
No, and thank you. This is specific to what we've heard from delegates. So in going through the report, was affordable housing, geared to income housing considered?
Are you directing that to staff, Councillor, or to Mr. Scanlon?
I'm sorry, you can't see it, but Mr. Scanlon is taking a chair and he's turning his microphone on.
Through the chair, I'm happy to answer that. We had discussions about affordable housing through the process. As you're aware, you do recover low-income housing as part of your development charge. So there are housing programs that you have in place to assist those in need. With respect to affordable housing, what we were looking at was to having a plan or an action plan that was advanced enough so that we could identify the actual capital needs or the funding that would come from the CBC. And at this particular point, your plans haven't advanced to a point where we can actually identify capital or investments in order to assist in affordable housing. We have places such as Mississauga and Richmond Hill who are quite advanced in their programs and are implementing those. So for those two, I know for sure, have been able to start to contribute towards their affordable housing needs. Just talking with St. Catharines last night, it's very similar situation they're in. We did include as part of their studies to assist in funding their affordable housing program, the study that they're undertaking, and that'll lay the foundation for the policies that we can then consider. If within a year or two you've developed those policies, then you're not restricted at this point from then looking at CBCs as a potential funding tool.
So I'm hearing that if we prepare those plans sufficiently enough, we can add it to the CBCs after this policy is adopted?
That's correct.
So we don't have to wait for 5 years as was implied.
That I think was the individual's interpretation, and that's fair. Maybe we did, and I didn't have the chance to dialogue with them. I would think that the services are similar to development charge. If I had planned an arena, but I'm not going to spend the money on arena, but I want to go to an indoor soccer facility, I can change the allocation from one facility to another. So it's something that I would believe would evolve as your policies evolve.
Chair Pearson, can I just make a comment?
Absolutely, Councillor, go ahead.
I find it disheartening and disconcerting that given the crisis that we have in Hamilton around homelessness and affordable housing and geared to income housing, that we are not sufficiently advanced in our plans that we could not have included it in a community benefit charge. I'm just making it as a broad open statement. For this entire term, we have been wrestling with homelessness and housing challenges. And here we are implementing community benefit charges, and our plans were not advanced enough to include in those calculations. And that is incredibly disheartening. And I am profoundly disappointed that that is not the case. I assumed from the get-go when we started this process that it would be a part of this process.
Thank you, Councillor. Mr. Scanlon?
My only reply through you, Madam Chair, is that at this particular point, we need to have something definitive so that we can incorporate it as part of the capital listing.
Chair Pearson, with the greatest respect, my comment was not directed at Mr. Scanlon. It was directed at our senior leadership team. Mr. Scanlon can only implement in our community benefit charges what we provide him as a municipality.
Absolutely. Thank you, Councillor. And that's why I want Mr. Scanlon to reiterate. So it's our senior staff that have to come back with projects. So that may be a question that could be asked going forward. Councillor Wilson?
Thank you, Chair. The question was asked respectfully by me, and the answer was the policy remains outstanding. Hence, the exclusion of affordable housing from this. So if I could just backtrack to make sure I understand the scope of it through the chair. Those studies that you referenced, Mr. Scanlon, in Mississauga, I think you said St. Catharines, and there was one other, forgive me, I didn't catch it. Those are a prerequisite before this municipality could consider the inclusion of affordable housing within a CBC, is that CBD, whatever, initiative framework.
So through you, Madam Chair, perhaps I misunderstood Councillor Wilson's question. There's probably two different things to talk about with affordable housing. If there's private initiatives for affordable housing, then I thought we were talking about potentially giving a grant instead of charging that particular development the 4%. We would have an exemption so that, or a funding mechanism so they didn't have to pay the 4%. So that's on one side. There's privately provided affordable housing initiatives, and we would look to develop a program to fund their 4% when they come forward. Part two of it is there's municipally initiated programs, and that would be part of our capital list. And that's the one where, yes, Richmond Hill was the one, Councillor, that you may have missed, and Mississauga. And we talked about funding the program that St. Catharines is undertaking to address affordable housing policies, all of their affordable housing policies. So those are potential. As I say, for municipally implemented, we need to identify capital requirements, and that program hasn't reached a state of maturity yet that we'd be able to incorporate those costs into our calculations, but they are in progress, as I understand.
Thank you. Through the chair, I think it was suggested from one of our delegates that Hamilton is quite far along in this. Could you confirm that all municipalities, however, with respect to developing a CBC policy, are required to submit? Is it this September? I thought I saw in the report as the identified deadline. And could you confirm whether Hamilton is far along or not compared to others? I'm sure you service a number of others.
So through you, Madam Chair, the September 18th date is the transition date. Oh. So that if places, Toronto, the Mississaugas, the Oakville, whomever, if they were collecting under the old act, they can continue to do that old process. But as of September 18th, if they want to, right, there'll be the new community benefit charge, and they have to have a bylaw, and they have to follow now the new rules that have been set out by the province. So that's what the September 18th is. Okay. There are a number of municipalities that are still in progress. They won't be implementing a bylaw for September 18th because the whole nature of community benefit charges is new to them. So they're taking a little bit more time. So I think I have probably another 10 or 12 clients on top of the ones that are currently using the old Section 37, and they'll be coming out over the next year, but they're not mandatorily required to do it by September 18th.
Oh, thank you for explaining that to me through the chair. Another question is, are there, whether they're Section 37 or whether they're phasing to going to this or beginning with this, Unlike Hamilton, we had no Section 37 operable. Do you know of any municipality who doesn't have one of the two, through the chair?
I apologize. I'm not quite clear. The one of the two?
So sorry. Maybe I'm not clear. One of the delegates was... I'm trying to understand the realm of possibility. Is there a possibility or of a municipality not having any method or having a Section 37 or a CBC policy?
Section 37 has been named community benefit charge for 20, 30 years. So that's what it is.
Yeah.
Is a community benefit charge. So if municipalities after September 18th, they must conform and have a bylaw. Historically, they had policies, such as Toronto would have a policy. They even had a guidebook. I don't believe, and I could be wrong, that they actually had a CBC bylaw. As of September 18th, Toronto, the Mississaugas, all of those individual municipalities must have a bylaw.
Thank you. My last question is back to the parking in the airports. I just want to make sure I understand. They are now eligible to receive CBC funding, but it's not mandatory. Could you just confirm that?
Correct. It is not mandatory that those two particular services be included. Municipalities go through and identify their different priorities or different works that would be considered, but if you didn't include municipal parking, there are lots of municipalities that aren't including municipal parking as part of their CBCs. It's not mandatory.
Thank you. Just a quick comment. I understand, for example, the encampment crisis has created a significant burden in the sense of all hands on deck responding to what is a very visible evidence of an affordable housing crisis, a health crisis, and the collusion of many crises. But like Councillor Clark, I certainly share a disappointment that we're not further along in the policy, even such that we're not able to even articulate where we are on it. So I just wanted to put that out there, that it is a priority of this municipality, and I would hope that we would be able to move on it. Please, thank you.
So through the chair, Brian McMullen again, I have a bit of a response on that one. So I understand through, sorry, okay, Councillor, yeah?
Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, so I understand that Healthy and Safe Communities is working on a report that is coming before Emergency and Community Services Committee in August. So we'll look to make sure that we have some commentary about the impact of CBCs, what can be done with CBCs, as Gary Scanlon indicated. There's an exemption program that is outstanding related to DCs, and whether we would then apply that to the CBC program. But then in addition, it's a question about under the CBCs, whether funding that the municipality gives to other not-for-profits is eligible for a CBC in kind of a growth capacity, or whether it's projects that we have to actually build and maintain and run ourselves.
Okay. Thank you, everyone. I think that exhausts the speakers list. Thank you for the clarification, Brian, and that, this is a works in progress and we'll be continuing. So I believe we had a mover and a seconder to approve the recommendations of report 8.
Madam Chair, I apologize. I missed the mover and seconder. So if you wouldn't mind just
I believe, okay, so I'm showing Councillor Brenda Johnson, Councillor Arlene Vanderbeek, please.
Thank you. Sorry about that.
That's okay. Electronic vote, everyone.
And that vote carries 6-5-4, 1 opposed.
Okay, thank you very much. Now we've addressed the first two delegations of public delegations. We still have to hear from 9-3 and 9-4. So I'm going to go to 9-3 is Brent Marshall on behalf of Wahid Al-Jabri, Hamilton Downtown Moss, respecting their support of city staff's recommendations in item 10.2 in person. So I would like to call upon Brent Marshall to come forward, please. And you have 5 minutes, Mr. Marshall.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I'd like to thank, through you, Madam Chair, the members of the committee for having us, allowing us to appear before them today. Certainly, as indicated in our request to appear, my client, the Downtown Hamilton Mosque, is appearing today to evidence its support of the report that has been prepared by staff and provided to this committee. In addition to the contents of the report, I'd just like to, for those members of this committee and perhaps council who are not entirely aware of the Downtown Hamilton Mosque, a few of the details of that organization, religious institution. The Downtown Hamilton Mosque has something in excess of 6,000 members. Many, a very large percentage of those members are recent or within the last few years residents of Canada. In the mosque, there is something, there's approximately 34 languages and or dialects spoken, representing which is evidence of the fact that many of its members come from at least 3 different continents. Most recently, the mosque has welcomed new members who are refugees from Syria. The mosque and the Islamic faith, obviously, as most faiths, have as their tenants is a charitable organization in both the legal and the practical sense. The mosque extends a welcome to its new members and assistance as they integrate into their new home city, which is Hamilton, and as they strive to build their lives in Canada. The central tenet of the report, and I think the justification that has been expressed by staff, is that the adoption of this report and the granting of the tax exemption, or the non-collection of the taxes, rather, is based on fairness. As you will note in the report, in particular, one comment which I'd like to highlight, and I apologize, my copy isn't paginated. Oh, I apologize. On page 2 of 5, the last paragraph, the last sentence rather, in the first paragraph, this property has always been used as a place of worship, and it has not been used for any other purposes since it was acquired by the Downtown Hamilton Mosque. I can't explain, nor have I been able over a couple of years of involvement in this file, as to how impact necessarily came to its conclusion, but that obviously is not an issue to be discussed today. Essentially, this organization in my submission makes a huge contribution to the city of Hamilton, and it's certainly a great number of its newer residents, but also many of the residents in the downtown core. The community of the Hamilton Mosque is not an affluent community on average compared to probably the rest of the city. The imposition or the continued steps by the city to attempt to collect the taxes owing would have a devastating and incredibly detrimental effect on this community. And quite frankly, its future may very well be in question. In any event, I urge the committee to adopt the report as presented by council, or by staff. And I would also like to thank staff for their extensive, fair, and comprehensive report on the situation. In conclusion, I'd just like to say that the Downtown Hamilton Mosque, I believe and would submit to you, is deserving of the discretion of this committee and of council, and I urge you to adopt the report. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Marshall.
Oh, I should wait for any questions, if any. Sorry.
No, I don't see anyone on the speakers list, so I thank you for your input on this, and we will be dealing with the report shortly.
Thank you.
With that, may I please have a mover and a seconder to receive Mr. Marshall's presentation, moved by Councillor Ferguson, seconded by Councillor Brenda Johnson. Recorded vote, please.
And that vote carries 6-0.
Thank you. And we're going to go on to our last delegate is Alex Bishop on behalf of DCR Holdings, Inc. and Harlow Capital, respecting item 10.3. And I believe Alex is in attendance, please.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair and the committee. My name is Alex Bishop, and as the clerk said, I am delegating on behalf of Harlow and DCR. I think the last time I was in front of you was when we were working together to turn the last PCB dump site into agricultural land. So what I'm looking for is kind of the same collaborative ethos that we looked at last time. And I think given the complexity of the file, the sensitive spaces we had to work with, and of course the pandemic, I think we can all, which everyone can agree has negatively impacted development in the city. My ask, which is slightly different from what the recommendation was, is not only reasonable, but actually in the best interest of Hamilton. So I'm here to review with you, Madam Chair, and the committee, the background regarding the property, the demolition work, including the demolition credits obtained in 2012, the remediation, the development from 2012 onward. So my submission is that this is a significant brownfield development for the city, and not just a Ward 3 issue. This is a city issue, which has required very significant resources in time and money to initiate and develop. The demolition credits are and were and are a key part of the sale of the property, and were factored into the sale of the property being developed. So as a history, the demolition credits were initially given in 2012 and were set to expire in 2017, subject to extensions by the city. It's important to note that there are no absolute deadlines in terms of extensions given, and it's in fact to the discretion of the general manager, planning, economic development council, who has the discretion at this point. In 2017, the city agreed to extend the expiry of the credits because of the complex, and I'm just going to quote directly from it, complex, innovative program for brownfield development. The development team has worked in a timely manner. Site servicing was completed. Another 5 years is a reasonable period to get sales and building permits for this complex brownfield site. And this is a quote directly from the committee's report to council. The committee's report also noted that the site required extensive remediation for which the city was provided security. So the city was provided security for that. It's also acknowledged that the city has foregone, and I think we need to acknowledge this, that the city's foregone tax revenues for the vacant property. That's for sure. But the owner has incurred far more in terms of significant costs and losses needed to and will need to remediate and develop the property. And most interestingly is that there have been significant property tax increases, which when the property was registered, which could have been appealed by the owners but was not, because I think this really speaks to the collaborative ethos of understanding that we need to work together to make brownfield developments like this happen. It's also recognized that the city needs to have a time limit. This is a clear recognition. We need to have a time limit on how long demolition credits should last, as it incentivizes timely development. We get that. And we want to obviously avoid tax losses. We also recognize that the city has not in the past extended credits beyond 10 years before, and rarely. But what my submission is that this is not about the development, but rather about the bigger picture for Hamilton and its development, including how the city deals with matters as complex as this, as a brownfield development in the middle of a pandemic, with some very specific environmental concerns, which I'll touch upon briefly. There's a bigger advantage and precedent for the city here that will confirm that Hamilton is in fact open for business on brownfield development, and that developers can see by how Hamilton deals with difficult brownfield sites what they can expect going forward. And given the size of this brownfield development, the complexity of the property, the remediation that had to be completed, which includes issues around sensitive bird species like the chimney swifts, which when I was a student at McMaster, I worked in as an avian biologist, and they were one of the species we looked at. And so there was a long period of time where we were unable to develop because of the nesting and things related to the chimney swifts. And again, it goes back to speaking to what kind of partner you have in DCR and Harlow. So furthermore, the remediation had to wait for these birds as I mentioned, and of course, COVID exacerbated matters. And the fact that we're in a situation where we've actually moved ahead on a few different matters, it would actually be a fantastic precedent that if you have a complex site that requires extensive remediation, if you proceed diligently with servicing and sales, and if you run into a worldwide pandemic that shuts everything down, Hamilton will stand behind development for brownfield development with those conditions because it's in the best interest of the city and its residents and the businesses.
Alex, you're out past your 5-minute limit, sir.
Okay, I can shut it down. So what I'm seeking is really that the first consideration, not a full 5-year extension, rather a 3-year extension. And we'd be really happy to work with and engage with this committee. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Any questions of the speaker? I don't see
Councillor Wilson.
Go ahead, Councillor Wilson.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for being here. I just, for my own purposes, who is DCR Holdings and who is Harlow Capital?
Good question. So DCR Holdings is what's now the former Allen Factory family. So that this is it's turned into a holding company because, of course, the Allen Factory is shut down. So it was an office site for Allen Factory. The property in question is the 440 Victoria North, which is now a Studebaker plant. Harlow is also the group that's involved in a number of other developments, including Hamilton City Centre.
Thank you. I'm just trying to understand who the local principals are, and are you able to expand on that?
The specific people involved?
Yeah.
It's the family that DCR is the family that owned the Allen Factory, Allen Candy Factory.
Sorry. Okay. The other one, Mr. Bishop, the Harlow Capital, you mentioned Hamilton Centre. Did you say that?
City Centre. They're involved in developing Hamilton City Centre.
All right. I'll just have my questions through to staff. Thank you.
Thank you for that. So may I please have a mover and a seconder? Thank you, Mr. Bishop, to receive Mr. Bishop's presentation. Moved by, Councillor Vanderbeek, second by Councillor Ferguson. Electronic vote, please. Councillor Ferguson, question, sir?
Yeah, just one more question to the presenter. You've had these extensions for 10 years. Why we've just gone through one of the biggest booms in industrial development in recent history in Hamilton. Why is this taking so long?
Through the chair, thank you for that question. So there isn't really an easy 164 character answer for this. The biggest thing is the fact that this is a very complicated site. The sensitive species that are involved are one part of it. And the fact that we've had, after uncovering some of these unforeseen expenses, it's expanded the timeline to actually develop. So one of them would be the environmental remediation, of which part of that would be the sensitive species on top of that as well. So it shortens the window of period for us to actually be able to develop the land.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry, Madam Chair, we can't hear you.
You have a mover and a seconder?
I do, yes, thank you.
Yeah, and recorded vote, please. Thank you, Mr. Bishop. And I'm just wondering respectfully if we shouldn't take maybe a 5-10 minute break. I'm seeing it at 12:21 that we take a break till 12:30 just to allow staff. Sorry?
Sure. Sorry, Madam Chair. That vote passed 6-0. Just a reminder that we do have a special council meeting and then ENCS starts at 1:30. So I'm just cognizant of the time.
It's okay. Let's keep going then. I just might scoot out and come back myself then, not a problem. So on discussion items 10.1 we dealt with, 10.2 we're on to treasurers. write-off of taxes under Section 354 of the Municipal Act 2001 FCS 22049 and LS 22024 citywide. Mover and a seconder put the item on the floor. Moved by Councillor Ferguson, seconded by Councillor Clark. Any discussions on this item? Seeing none, electronic vote, please. Thank you, everyone. And now, sorry, Madam Clerk.
Sorry, that vote carries 6-0.
Thank you. Item 10.3 is the development charge demolition credit extension request for Hamilton Central Business Park, Studebaker Place and Ferry Street, formerly 440 Victoria Avenue North, FCS 17067. This is citywide and it was an outstanding business item. Mover and a seconder, please. Councillor Johnson, I saw your hand up. Are you moving that? Councillor Johnson, yeah, thank you. Moved by Councillor Johnson, second by Councillor Clark, then, if that's appropriate. I think he's still there, yes. And are there any questions on this report? Councillor Clark, you wish to question?
Yeah, and I'm not sure about seconding it until I get an answer to the question. The letter from the lawyer indicates that COVID caused them significant delays over the 2-year period. Do we have an understanding of what those delays were that would cause that? And is it possible to have a 2-year extension so that we're procedurally fair, given that COVID did hit everybody?
So through the chair, Brian McMullen here. I think Jason Thorne is on the WebEx as well. I think he was going to be available to answer some questions in general about the planning processes during COVID.
Yes, through the chair, Jason Thorne, General Manager of Planning and Economic Development. I haven't seen details in terms of what specifically about COVID would have contributed to delays in development from the applicant standpoint. What I can say to committee is, from an approval standpoint, we never stopped issuing development approvals. We never stopped receiving development applications, doing our development reviews. From a construction standpoint, although there was a very brief moment in time where there were some restrictions, provincial restrictions on the ability for construction to proceed, my recollection is that industrial was exempted from that. So I don't believe there were any of those sort of provincial COVID regulations that would have prevented any construction from advancing. And as council knows, it was, especially from an industrial standpoint, both 2021, 2022 were record-breaking years for the city in terms of the amount of industrial construction that occurred.
So to be clear, the province of Ontario exempted the industrial or the ICI sector from any of the COVID mandates that would cause them to delay development?
Through the chair, my recollection was that when there was a brief period of time where construction was restricted, my recollection is that industrial was an exempted use. I'd have to go back and triple check that. But notwithstanding, it was for a fairly brief time, and it only affected construction activity. So at that time, site plan approvals and processing of development and planning applications would, of course, continue.
Thank you. I'll second the motion.
Thank you, sir. And Councillor Vanderbeek, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. That line of questioning was exactly where I was going, so thank you very much.
Thank you. Councillor Wilson.
I guess I was going to ask, thanks through you, Chair Pearson, to Mr. Thorne, if he's still available. Last night I was reading on my own time a number of realtor publications about the value of industrial land, and I think a motion that's on the table with respect to we just saw the sale of the Stelco lands at a considerable price. So I was wondering if you could just talk about the value of these lands on behalf of the municipality.
So through the chair, I apologize. We would not have done sort of an appraisal of the land values and what they may be worth. I think to the councillor's question around sort of the trend in industrial land values, yes, in the past 3-4 years in particular, it has been very significant growth in terms of industrial land values. We've seen that with some of our own dispositions of some industrial lands that the city ourselves had acquired, and we're able to sort of dispose of them at significantly more than we would have acquired them. And in terms of some of the transactions that we have seen in the industrial land market, yes, they are up quite significantly.
Thank you. And through the chair, if I could ask through you, Chair Pearson, to Mr. McMullen, probably, what at present is our deficit in terms of DC exemptions?
Yeah, so through the chair, we're talking around the $60 million range that we have a development charge, DC exemption deficit that we plan to fund over the upcoming years.
So if I understood the report correctly, if we were to extend this, we would have to find a funding source elsewhere?
Yeah, so through the chair, the potential foregone DC collections are about $7.3 million.
Thank you. Appreciate your answers.
Thank you for that. And I just will relinquish the chair to Councillor Van de Beek real quick. I appreciate Jason Thorne's comments. And, I have concerns because this will set precedent, and I don't believe we've had any other requests at this time. So I'm going to leave it at that. I'm going to go back then. We did have a mover and a seconder on the floor. Councillor Clark, you're standing by seconding this?
Yes, Chair.
Thank you. Then I'll ask that we have a recorded vote, please, on the recommendation on the report. Thank you.
And that vote carries 6-0.
Thank you for that, everyone. I'm going to move on to 10.4 is the standardization of Cloudflare Enterprise Suite of Products for Corporate Information Technology, FCS 22051 citywide. Maria McChesney is in attendance. And can I have a move and a second to put it on the floor? Moved by Councillor Ferguson, seconded by Councillor Wilson. It's on the floor. Are there any questions on this report? Seeing none, I'll ask for a recorded vote, please.
And that vote carries 6-0.
Thank you. 10.5, liability insurance extension, LS 22026 citywide. We have Ron Zabo in attendance. We have a mover and a seconder. Put the item on the floor and the recommendation. Moved by Councillor Brendan Johnson, second by Councillor Van der Beek. Any questions or comments on this item? Seeing none, I'll ask for a recorded vote, please. Thank you, everyone. We do have before us now.
Carries 6-0. Sorry.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. I'm just trying to move us along because I know we're under time constraints now. Motions before us 11.1. Councillor Johnson, I'm going to turn to you. It's with regards to City Enrichment Fund budget request.
Yeah, thank you. This was brought forward at the last AFNA, and I said it's fine for us to table it to this one. Please keep in mind, this is just to send the conversation to the 2023 budget. This is not to decide any increases at this time. It's really for the 2023 budget to take a look at a fulsome understanding of what is being requested. So I really appreciate your support, just sending it to the 2023 budget deliberations so that the staff can be prepared to put together a report as to how much money is being requested, how much would be would qualify, and how much money we actually have to give. So if I just appreciate everybody's support just to send the conversation and the questions and all that to the 2023 budget. This is not to approve the increase, but just to get the conversation rolling. Thank you.
And your seconder, Councillor Johnson?
Oh, sorry, it was Councillor Van der Beek.
Thank you. And a recorded vote then, please. Thank you.
Sorry, Madam Chair. Councillor Clark has questions.
My apologies. I flipped to the vote too fast. Councillor Clark, go ahead, sir.
I appreciate you trying to expedite this. Can I just ask that staff in their report back include how many recipients of grants from the municipality have come off that roll? How many have moved on to other funding or self-sustained funding, and how many have been continually receiving funds over the term? Thank you.
Excellent question. Thank you. So it's moved and seconded with the friendly amendment. And recorded vote, please.
And that vote carries 6-0.
Thank you. Now we're under 11.2 is the assessment of 386 Wilcox Street, Hamilton. I'm going to relinquish the chair to Councillor Vanderbeek as I will put the motion on the floor. Madam Clerk, do I have to read or I can just, because it is before us?
It was published in the regular agenda as well.
Okay, so I'm just going to say it's moved by myself and it's seconded by Councillor Lloyd Ferguson. This is the assessment of 386 Wilcox Street, Hamilton for the 2023 taxation year. The motion is before you.
And I don't see any speakers. Councillor Vanderbeek, would you like me to open the vote?
Sorry, yes, please do that.
Thank you.
And that vote carries 6-0.
Thank you, and I'll turn the chair back to you, Councillor Pearson.
Thank you very much. Whenever we have no notices of motion, general information, nothing. Private and confidential, we have June 2nd, 2022 closed minutes. May I have a mover and a second to approve the closed minutes of the June 2nd, 2022 meeting. Councillor Ferguson, Councillor Brenda Johnson, electronic vote, please.
And that vote carries 6-0.
Thank you. We've dealt with Wilcox Street. I now need a motion to adjourn. And before we do, Madam Clerk, do we go right into council in about 5 minutes?
Yes, Janet has already started the WebEx for council. So if you want to get a quick bathroom break and then join us for council.
And who's chairing that?
The mayor is chairing.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So with that, motion to adjourn audit and finance meeting. Councillor Ferguson, Councillor Vanderbeek, electronic vote, please.
And that vote carries 6-0.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. I want to thank you. The roadmap today was very, very well put together and streamlined. Thank you so much for the time you put into these. Thank you, everyone.
Have a good day.
Okay.